In the hidden corners of global affairs, where diplomacy ends and shadows begin, intelligence agencies operate as the silent architects of modern history. They are institutions born not merely from national interest, but from the primal human instinct to survive, to know more than the enemy, and to strike before being struck. Across every continent, in every major power, these agencies lurk behind government buildings, obscure funding lines, and classified documents, quietly shaping world events while the rest of us remain fixated on surface headlines. These aren't just bureaucracies, they are chess masters, playing games in real time where the pieces are real people, the moves are real consequences, and the checkmates often go unseen by the public eye. The very concept of intelligence is rooted in secrecy. Unlike a military force, whose strength is meant to be seen and felt, the effectiveness of an intelligence service lies in its invisibility. It gathers what should not be known, it interferes where it has no legal presence, and it influences outcomes without ever claiming responsibility. The best intelligence operation is the one that never makes the news, not because it failed, but because it succeeded so quietly no one even knew it happened. In this world, silence is both a method and a message. But what exactly do these organizations do? Their roles go far beyond the common image of a spy with a briefcase or a hacker in a darkroom. Intelligence agencies are multidimensional operations. At their core, they are tasked with collecting, analyzing, and acting upon information critical to national security. This includes monitoring foreign governments, tracking terrorist threats, conducting economic surveillance, influencing public opinion, and even engaging in psychological operations designed to mislead or disorient adversaries. Yet, the boundaries are not always clear. These agencies can become deeply entangled in political games, ideological conflicts, and international power struggles, where the difference between defense and provocation is just a matter of perspective. Throughout history, some of the most dramatic geopolitical events have either originated from, or been manipulated by, intelligence work. Coups have been orchestrated, elections swayed, wars averted, or ignited, because of the whisper of a well-placed asset or the extraction of a vital document. And while some intelligence successes are eventually declassified and celebrated, many more remain in the darkness, known only to a handful of operatives and their superiors. This creates an environment where truth becomes fragmented, history is partially written, and entire populations live in the aftermath of decisions made behind locked doors. In the modern world, intelligence has evolved with technology. The spies of today don't just wear suits and carry briefcases, they also write code, fly drones, and manipulate algorithms. Surveillance is now digital, global, and constant. With satellites overhead and data centers crunching signals from phones and emails, the battlefield has moved from smoky cafes and safe houses into the limitless ether of cyberspace. The intelligence agency of the 21st century doesn't just observe events, it anticipates them, shapes them, and in some cases, engineers them from the ground up. Yet with great power comes profound ethical ambiguity. Intelligence work often exists in a legal and moral gray zone. Wiretaps without warrants, covert funding of foreign groups, extrajudicial assassinations, these are not just the stuff of fiction, but real tactics deployed in the name of national interest. For the public, the consequences of these actions can be difficult to assess. On one hand, intelligence agencies protect citizens from terror attacks, foreign sabotage, and internal subversion. On the other, they can become tools of repression, secrecy, and unchecked influence, operating outside democratic scrutiny. The same agency that prevents a bombing may also suppress a whistleblower. The same operative who gathers intelligence might plant misinformation. This duality lies at the heart of why intelligence agencies fascinate us. They are, in many ways, the most human of institutions, driven by fear, ambition, loyalty, and deception. We're drawn to stories of spies not just because of the danger, but because they reflect a deeper truth, that power often hides itself, and that the real decisions, the ones that change nations, are rarely made in public. That fascination fuels books, films, and conspiracy theories, but it also masks the real and present impact these agencies have on global life. In every major world event, whether it's a crisis in the Middle East, a cyber attack in Eastern Europe, or a diplomatic rupture in Asia, there is a good chance that somewhere, behind the scenes, an intelligence agency was involved, planning, observing, or pulling the strings. To understand modern geopolitics, one must understand these agencies, not just their names, but their methods, their missions, and the myths that surround them. Some are widely known, their acronyms part of popular culture. Others prefer to stay buried in obscurity, their very existence denied or ignored. But all of them, regardless of nationality, play a high-stakes game that few of us ever get to see. And it is in this unseen world that the true drama of our era unfolds, where wars may be prevented by a single intercepted message, where dictators fall because of a planted rumor, and where entire revolutions are born from secrets. As we begin to explore the 10 most famous and mysterious intelligence agencies in the world, we are not merely listing organizations, we are stepping into the hidden machinery of global power. Each agency reveals not just a nation's fears and ambitions, but also its strategy for navigating a dangerous, unpredictable world. To understand them is to peer through the veil, to glimpse the architecture of secrecy that underlies our modern reality. To truly grasp how intelligence shapes the world we live in, we must now step into the shadows and examine the agencies themselves, beginning with the one that perhaps casts the longest shadow of all, the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, the silent giant of American power. When the Central Intelligence Agency was formally established in 1947, it was born not merely as an institution, but as a response, an answer to a rapidly shifting global order and a chilling realization that knowledge, more than firepower, would determine the future of nations. The world was still reeling from the destruction of World War II, but as the dust settled, a new kind of war began, one fought not with tanks or aircraft, but with secrets, sabotage, and surveillance. The United States, having emerged as a superpower, understood the need for a centralized intelligence body that could gather, analyze, and act upon information in real time. Thus, from the ashes of the wartime Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the CIA emerged, cloaked in secrecy, tasked with defending a new American century. The OSS, led by the charismatic and unconventional Wild Bill Donovan during the war, had laid the foundation for what an intelligence agency could be: agile, covert, and global in reach. Its missions included everything from gathering Nazi secrets to supporting resistance movements in occupied Europe. However, after the war, the OSS was disbanded, and its remnants were scattered among various agencies. But the Cold War changed everything. As tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union crystallized into an ideological standoff, President Harry S. Truman signed the National Security Act of 1947, which not only established the CIA but also restructured America's military and security apparatus. The CIA's mandate was clear: to coordinate the nation's intelligence efforts and conduct espionage abroad. Yet what it would become was far greater, and far darker, than anyone anticipated. In its earliest days, the CIA was primarily a collection agency, tasked with providing the president and policymakers with accurate and timely intelligence about foreign threats. But quickly, the agency began to evolve into something more aggressive. Under the leadership of figures like Allen Dulles, the CIA began to embrace the idea that intelligence gathering alone was not enough. The agency needed to act. It needed to shape events, not just observe them. And so began a legacy of covert operations, secret wars, regime changes, psychological warfare, and clandestine funding that would define not only the CIA, but American foreign policy itself. One of the CIA's first major operations came in 1953, in Iran. Fearing that the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossad would nationalize British oil interests and draw Iran closer to the Soviet Union, the CIA, working with British intelligence, launched Operation Ajax. The mission involved bribing Iranian officials, spreading propaganda, and orchestrating street protests to destabilize Mossad's government. The result was a successful coup that reinstalled the Shah of Iran, a Western ally, to power. Though celebrated internally as a triumph of covert influence, Operation Ajax would later be viewed as the spark that sowed the seeds of resentment leading to the 1979 Iranian Revolution and decades of hostility between Iran and the United States. Just a year later, in 1954, the CIA launched another coup, this time in Guatemala. President Jacobo Arbenz had initiated land reforms that threatened the interests of the United Fruit Company, an American corporation with deep ties in Washington. Using Cold War rhetoric to justify its actions, the CIA organized Operation Success, which armed and trained a rebel force to oust Arbenz. The coup plunged Guatemala into political turmoil and decades of civil war, and once again, the agency's fingerprints were carefully wiped clean from the official narrative. But within the walls of Langley, Virginia, the CIA's eventual headquarters, these operations were seen as proof of the agency's effectiveness in shaping geopolitics without conventional warfare. Throughout the Cold War, the CIA expanded its reach. It spied on Soviet nuclear capabilities, conducted surveillance flights with U-2 spy planes, and developed satellite programs that could read a license plate from space. Its analysts warned presidents of emerging threats, while its field operatives worked behind enemy lines, recruiting defectors, stealing documents, and undermining Soviet influence wherever it appeared. The agency was both respected and feared, an omnipresent force in global affairs that rarely admitted its own role in history. Yet not all of the CIA's operations ended in success. The 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, one of the most infamous failures in the agency's history, was an attempted overthrow of Fidel Castro's regime in Cuba. A CIA-trained force of Cuban exiles landed on the island expecting to incite a popular uprising. But the operation was poorly planned and executed, and it quickly collapsed. The invaders were captured or killed, and the incident embarrassed the Kennedy administration, leading to a deeper rift with Cuba and escalating tensions with the Soviet Union. In the 1970s, the agency found itself under intense scrutiny. Revelations of domestic surveillance, assassination plots, and illegal activities abroad led to congressional investigations. The Church Committee, named after Senator Frank Church, exposed the CIA's involvement in efforts to assassinate foreign leaders like Patrice Lumumba and Fidel Castro, as well as its secret experiments with mind control under the MKUltra program. These findings shocked the American public and led to greater oversight, including the creation of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. For the first time, the CIA was forced to operate within a framework of accountability, though critics argued that true transparency would always be impossible for such an inherently secretive organization. Despite the scandals, the CIA remained central to American strategy, especially during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. In one of its most consequential long-term operations, the agency funneled billions of dollars in weapons and training to Afghan mujahideen fighters resisting Soviet forces. This effort, often romanticized in the West as a fight for freedom, would have far-reaching consequences. Among those who benefited from the CIA's support was a young Saudi named Osama bin Laden, one of many unintended outcomes of the agency's realpolitik calculations. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 left the CIA without its primary adversary. For a time, the agency seemed directionless, searching for new missions in a world no longer defined by bipolar conflict. But the rise of global terrorism, particularly after the attacks of September 11, 2001, thrust the CIA back into the center of American power. The agency was instrumental in tracking al-Qaeda operatives, developing drone warfare programs, and establishing a global network of black sites, secret prisons used to interrogate suspects using what the agency euphemistically called enhanced interrogation techniques. These methods, widely regarded as torture, ignited fierce debates over legality, morality, and effectiveness. The killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011, in a covert raid by U.S. Navy SEALs supported by CIA intelligence, was seen as a vindication of the agency's post-9/11 focus. Yet it also marked the culmination of a decade-long pursuit that had reshaped the agency's priorities, tools, and image. The CIA of the 2010s was no longer just a spy network, it was a paramilitary force, a cyber power, and a global surveillance giant. It operated in war zones and boardrooms, in foreign capitals and digital networks, and its reach extended to nearly every corner of the globe. In recent years, the CIA has grappled with new challenges: the rise of China and its own powerful intelligence apparatus, the resurgence of Russian espionage, cyber warfare threats from non-state actors, and internal debates over how far the agency should go in defending national interests. It faces scrutiny over its methods and relevance in a world where private companies collect more data than governments ever could, and where truth itself is increasingly under siege by propaganda and disinformation. Yet despite its controversies, contradictions, and countless secrets, the CIA remains one of the most powerful and mysterious organizations in the modern world. It has outlived empires, adapted to new eras, and shaped the fates of countries without ever needing an army. To understand the CIA is to understand the American psyche, its fears, its ambitions, and its belief that knowledge, when wielded in the dark, can change the course of history. The agency's motto, etched on its headquarters wall, reads, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." But the real truth about the CIA may never be known, not in full, not by the public, and perhaps not even by the agency itself. While the CIA may dominate the headlines and command the lion's share of global attention, its oldest ally across the Atlantic possesses an equally storied, though far more discreet, legacy. To understand the roots of modern espionage, we must now turn to the birthplace of the gentleman spy, Britain's MI6. MI6, the silent aristocracy of espionage. Before the cloak and dagger theatrics of the Cold War, before satellites traced missiles from space and cyber weapons disabled nations in seconds, espionage wore a different face. It was the face of discretion, of tailored suits and leather-bound dossiers, of code names whispered in club lounges and instructions passed under flickering gas lamps. In this age of shadows, one institution emerged as the blueprint for modern intelligence work. Known formally as the Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, but famously as MI6, Britain's foreign intelligence agency did not begin with a bang, but with a quiet nod to necessity, born not out of glory, but out of fear that the empire might not see the next century unless it listened more closely to the murmurs of the world. MI6 was officially founded in 1909 as part of the Secret Service Bureau, a response to growing anxieties about German espionage ahead of the First World War. Britain, still a global empire at the time, had become increasingly aware that its supremacy on the seas and in diplomacy was vulnerable to more covert threats. Intelligence gathering, once the realm of diplomats, merchants, and naval officers acting unofficially, now required structure, permanence, and state backing. The original bureau was divided into two sections, one focusing on domestic threats, what would become MI5, and one on foreign intelligence, MI6. From the start, MI6 was cloaked in a different kind of secrecy than its American counterparts. British intelligence culture was one of understatement, built on tradition, elite networks, and the belief that true power need not announce itself. Recruits often came from the same schools, Eton, Harrow, Oxford, Cambridge, and carried with them not only education, but a sense of inherited duty. They were, in many ways, the archetypes of the gentleman spy, well-read, well-traveled, and well-mannered, capable of slipping into high society one day and slipping across borders the next. The fiction of Ian Fleming's James Bond, himself a wartime naval intelligence officer, was not as far from truth as some might assume. During World War I, MI6 operated primarily in Europe and the Middle East, trying to monitor enemy movements and undermine German alliances. Its efforts were modest, sometimes clumsy, but planted the seeds for what would become a much more expansive global reach. But it was in World War II that MI6 matured into a formidable force. Under the direction of Sir Stuart Menzies, known simply as C, the agency worked closely with codebreakers at Bletchley Park, coordinated resistance efforts in occupied Europe, and provided Winston Churchill with the intelligence that allowed Britain to punch far above its weight. It was also during this time that MI6 became enmeshed in a relationship that would define the post-war order, its alliance with the United States, particularly with the newly formed CIA. The so-called special relationship between the UK and US intelligence services began in the ashes of Nazi Germany and flourished in the fires of the Cold War. They shared signals, human sources, and analysis. They collaborated on coups, surveillance programs, and covert propaganda efforts. Yet while the CIA would soon dominate in scale and funding, MI6 maintained a unique cachet, small, nimble, and intimately connected to old-world influence. But not all of MI6's Cold War story was one of success. The agency suffered a devastating betrayal in what became known as the Cambridge spy ring, an infamous case where 5 British men, including high-ranking MI6 officer Kim Philby, secretly worked as Soviet double agents. Philby, who had been groomed for leadership within the service and maintained deep ties with both MI6 and the CIA, passed vital intelligence to Moscow for years before finally defecting in 1963. His betrayal was not only a security disaster, it struck at the heart of the MI6 identity, calling into question the very networks of trust and privilege on which the agency had been built. It exposed the danger of recruiting based on class and connection, and forced MI6 to rethink its recruitment and vetting practices in an age where ideology often overruled loyalty. Still, MI6 recovered and adapted. In the 1970s and 1980s, its focus expanded from traditional Cold War surveillance to include counterterrorism, particularly as threats from the IRA and Middle Eastern factions began to escalate. MI6 agents operated in shadows throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and the Soviet bloc, cultivating sources, disrupting arms trades, and helping to manage an increasingly chaotic world. While the CIA had more firepower and a larger global presence, MI6 often boasted better human intelligence, or human, especially in culturally complex environments. British operatives, trained in subtlety, patience, and interpersonal manipulation, became prized for their ability to read rooms, win trust, and operate undercover without raising suspicion. The end of the Cold War, much like it did for the CIA, prompted MI6 to redefine its mission. No longer locked in a binary struggle with the Soviet Union, the agency pivoted toward new threats, rogue states, nuclear proliferation, transnational crime, and eventually, Islamic terrorism. The 9/11 attacks marked a watershed moment, forcing intelligence services worldwide into new modes of cooperation and surveillance. MI6 played a key role in tracking al-Qaeda operatives, preventing attacks on British soil, and identifying radicalization patterns across Europe. In more recent years, MI6 has focused increasingly on cyber threats, the resurgence of Russia under Vladimir Putin, and the rising influence of China. The 2006 poisoning of former Russian agent Alexander Litvinenko in London using polonium-210 shocked the public and served as a brutal reminder of Cold War-style tactics in the modern world. British intelligence linked the act to the Kremlin, and MI6, working in tandem with MI5 and the Metropolitan Police, pursued the case with unusual openness, signaling a willingness to call out foreign aggression in stark terms. More recently, the attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal with the nerve agent Novichok, again on British soil, reaffirmed that the new era of espionage would be just as dangerous, and even more brazen, than the old one. Unlike the CIA, MI6 rarely acknowledges specific operations. The agency's director, still referred to as C in homage to its earliest days, maintains a quiet public profile. Only in the 1990s was MI6 even officially recognized by the British government, and its headquarters, an imposing structure on the Thames in London, was for decades an unspoken secret. Today, the agency has become more open in tone, even establishing an official website and engaging in limited public outreach. But the core of MI6 remains hidden, its methods, its agents, and its operations known only to a select few. In British political life, the head of MI6 answers to the Foreign Secretary, and oversight is provided through parliamentary committees. Still, like all intelligence services, it walks a fine line between accountability and autonomy. The tension between transparency and secrecy is especially acute in a democratic society that values open governance but relies on secret action to remain secure. In this sense, MI6 serves not just as a mirror of British foreign policy, but as its dark double, acting in places and in ways that diplomats cannot. For all its secrets, MI6 continues to capture the public imagination. The Bond mythos, glamorous, lethal, morally ambiguous, has made the agency an object of fascination worldwide. But the real MI6 is more complex. It is built not on heroics, but on persistence. Its victories are rarely celebrated, and its failures are often buried. Yet it remains one of the most respected, most capable, and most discreet intelligence agencies on Earth. Where the CIA may kick in the door, MI6 often slips through the window, no less effective, and often far less visible. As we move further into the intricate world of intelligence, the next chapter takes us to the Middle East, where precision, psychological warfare, and survival define one of the most formidable agencies in existence, Israel's Mossad. Mossad, the art of silent retribution. In the turbulent, ever-tense landscape of the Middle East, where diplomacy is fragile and enemies often lie just beyond the horizon, or already within, the State of Israel has forged an intelligence agency unlike any other. Known as Mossad Laliyah Bet, or simply Mossad, this agency does not merely collect secrets or observe from a distance. It strikes. It retrieves. It disrupts. Founded less than a year after the birth of the Israeli state itself, Mossad has always been more than an intelligence service. It is Israel's most invisible line of defense and, when needed, its most decisive blade. Mossad's formal establishment came in December 1949, at the direction of then Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. The fledgling nation of Israel, surrounded by hostile neighbors and scarred by the aftermath of the Holocaust, required not only an army to defend its borders, but a covert arm to protect its people from threats both visible and hidden. Mossad was born in this crucible, a necessity, not a luxury. Unlike older Western agencies built in times of empire or Cold War chess, Mossad was created in the shadow of genocide and under the constant threat of annihilation. Its mission was never theoretical. It was deeply personal. From the beginning, Mossad's scope extended far beyond Israel's tiny physical footprint. Its agents operated across continents, blending into foreign societies, building networks of informants, and executing operations with a precision that would become legendary. Early missions focused on helping Jews flee persecution in Arab countries in Eastern Europe, often at great personal risk. The agency's roots were in action, not bureaucracy. It did not wait for information to reach it, it went out and got it, by any means necessary. One of Mossad's earliest and most iconic operations remains a defining symbol of what the agency represents. In 1960, Mossad agents tracked down Adolf Eichmann, one of the chief architects of the Holocaust, who had been living under a false identity in Argentina for nearly a decade. Operation Finale, as it was later called, involved weeks of careful surveillance, a clandestine abduction in a Buenos Aires suburb, and a secret flight back to Israel, where Eichmann would stand trial in a courtroom broadcast around the world. This operation was more than a triumph of espionage. It was a message: no matter how far or how long you run, justice will come. Mossad had demonstrated not only its reach but its moral clarity, vengeance wielded with surgical precision. In the decades that followed, Mossad continued to evolve, often operating on the thin line between legality and necessity. During the 1972 Munich Olympics, 11 Israeli athletes were brutally murdered by the Palestinian terrorist group Black September. In response, Mossad launched Operation Wrath of God, a years-long campaign to hunt down and assassinate those responsible. The mission, shrouded in layers of secrecy and dramatized in books and film, became one of the most audacious and controversial undertakings in modern intelligence history. Mossad operatives used forged passports, safe houses across Europe, and complex surveillance to eliminate targets. While the morality of such retribution was hotly debated, there was no denying the message it sent: Israel would not forgive and would not forget. Unlike some intelligence agencies, Mossad has never been content to act solely in defense. Its philosophy is proactive. Preemption. Prevention. Elimination of threats before they can materialize. This approach has shaped many of its high-profile operations. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Mossad was instrumental in monitoring and ultimately sabotaging Iraq's efforts to build a nuclear reactor at Osirak. Israeli fighter jets destroyed the facility in 1981, but the groundwork for the strike, including intelligence on construction, air defenses, and the reactor's vulnerabilities, was gathered by Mossad agents on the ground. This fusion of espionage and military force has become a hallmark of Israeli strategy. Mossad's capabilities are wide-ranging. While many agencies specialize in signals intelligence, cyber operations, or human networks, Mossad excels in all three. It recruits foreign agents, intercepts digital communications, conducts surveillance, and, when needed, executes lethal missions. Its famed Kaidan unit, a secretive group of assassins and field agents, is believed to carry out Mossad's most dangerous tasks, including the elimination of high-value targets. Though Israel rarely acknowledges these operations, analysts and intelligence experts around the world attribute numerous assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists, Hezbollah commanders, and Hamas operatives to Mossad's quiet hand. Cyber warfare has also become a key pillar of Mossad's evolving strategy. In collaboration with other branches of Israeli intelligence, Mossad was reportedly involved in the development of the Stuxnet computer virus, a sophisticated cyber weapon that sabotaged Iran's nuclear centrifuges by causing them to spin out of control. The operation set back Iran's nuclear ambitions by years and marked a new era in global cyber conflict, where digital code could be as destructive as bombs. But with power comes controversy. Mossad's aggressive tactics have drawn criticism from international communities and human rights organizations. The agency's use of forged passports in assassinations, such as the 2010 killing of Mahmoud al-Mabhouh, a Hamas commander in Dubai, sparked diplomatic tensions with countries whose documents were allegedly used. Israel neither confirmed nor denied involvement, as is typical, but the style and sophistication of the operation bore all the hallmarks of Mossad's work. In the game of shadows, deniability is often as important as success. Internally, Mossad operates under direct control of the Prime Minister's office. Its chief, traditionally known only by the Hebrew initial Tsadi, is appointed by the Prime Minister and reports directly to them, ensuring the agency's missions are closely aligned with national strategic goals. Despite this centralized oversight, Mossad retains significant autonomy, and its operations are rarely subject to the same kind of public scrutiny faced by other democratic nations' intelligence services. In Israel, secrecy is woven into the national fabric, a necessity, not a choice. Unlike its American or British counterparts, Mossad has no public face, no press briefings, no official admissions. It has become mythologized not through openness but through silence. Israelis often speak of the agency with pride, tinged with awe. For a country that has lived under existential threat since its founding, Mossad represents something primal, a promise that someone is always watching, always protecting, always ready to strike first. Its recruitment is as unique as its mission. Mossad actively seeks individuals with diverse backgrounds, linguists, hackers, psychologists, engineers, and field operatives, yet it places supreme value on emotional intelligence, improvisational thinking, and loyalty. The agency has in recent years made efforts to modernize its image, even launching a public-facing website to attract new talent, especially in cybersecurity and advanced technologies. But make no mistake, Mossad's essence remains rooted in its founding philosophy: do what is necessary, not what is visible. Today, as the Middle East grows ever more complex, with shifting alliances, Iranian ambitions, and the persistent specter of terror, Mossad stands at the forefront of Israel's national defense. Its agents continue to conduct operations in enemy territory, intercept plots before they unfold, and shape the geopolitical landscape with quiet confidence. It is an agency born of trauma but guided by discipline, ruthless when it must be, restrained when it can be, and always watching. To study Mossad is to confront uncomfortable truths about the world we live in. In a global system where laws often lag behind threats, where diplomacy can be slow and indecision fatal, intelligence agencies like Mossad remind us that power, when cloaked in secrecy, can move faster than justice, and sometimes in its name. As we turn from the deserts of the Middle East to the frostbitten corridors of Moscow, we encounter another agency, born of revolution, shrouded in fear, and ever adept at reinventing itself: Russia's FSB, the successor to the infamous KGB. FSB, the shadow state of modern Russia. To understand Russia is to understand contradiction, a nation of grandeur and desolation, of literature and iron, of ballet and tanks. It is a land that has long straddled east and west, freedom and autocracy, idealism and fear. And nowhere are those contradictions more alive, more refined, more weaponized, than within its intelligence establishment. If the CIA is the architect of global power, MI6 the gentleman's cloak, and Mossad the dagger of survival, then the FSB is something altogether different, the fortress and the phantom, the state within a state. The FSB, Federalnaya Sluzba Bezopasnosti Rossiyskoj Federacji, is the direct descendant of the Soviet Union's KGB, the world's most infamous intelligence agency. It is not merely Russia's security service, it is one of the most powerful instruments of political and social control in modern Russian history. Where other agencies seek to guard against external threats, the FSB is equally focused inward, watching its own people, policing dissent, and ensuring that no threat, real or imagined, grows unchecked within the Russian body politic. And unlike its Western counterparts, which must answer to laws, courts, and oversight committees, the FSB answers chiefly to one man, the President of the Russian Federation. Its origins are bloodied with the legacy of fear. In 1917, following the Bolshevik Revolution, the newly formed Soviet state created the Cheka, an internal security force tasked with rooting out counter-revolutionaries. Over the following decades, it would morph through multiple forms: the NKVD under Stalin, which carried out the Great Purge and mass executions, the MGB, and eventually, the KGB, formed in 1954. The KGB became one of the largest and most powerful intelligence agencies in the world, with sprawling networks of informants, secret prisons, and foreign agents across every continent. It was both sword and shield of the Communist Party, feared even more within the Soviet Union than abroad. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the KGB was disbanded, or so it seemed. In truth, it fragmented into various successor organizations. Foreign intelligence was handed to the SVR. Signals intelligence went to the FAPSI. But the most potent element, the domestic security and counterintelligence apparatus, was reborn as the FSB in 1995, following a presidential decree by Boris Yeltsin. It inherited not only the functions of the KGB's internal wing but much of its culture, personnel, and instincts. The FSB would not be a new agency, it would be a continuation, one whose mission was clear: to guard the Russian state from enemies within and without, and to ensure that no revolution, political, ideological, or technological, ever threatened it again. The rise of Vladimir Putin, a former KGB officer himself, would cement the FSB's place at the heart of Russian power. When Putin assumed the presidency in 2000, the FSB was not merely elevated, it became the nervous system of the state. Former agents were placed in key positions across the government, judiciary, military, and business sectors. The informal group known as the Siloviki, those with backgrounds in security or military services, rose to dominance. Putin, drawing on his own training and worldview, transformed the FSB into something more than a security service. It became his instrument of rule, opaque, loyal, and utterly embedded. The FSB's functions are vast. Officially, it is responsible for counterintelligence, internal security, counterterrorism, border control, and surveillance. In practice, it does much more. It monitors political opposition, investigates extremism, a term so broad in Russian law it can apply to protesters, bloggers, or journalists, and ensures ideological conformity across media and education. Its agents conduct wiretaps, raid offices, infiltrate organizations, and engage in covert psychological warfare, often under the legal cover of state security. While Western intelligence agencies are often divided between foreign and domestic operations, the FSB blurs those lines. It has taken an increasingly active role in Russia's foreign policy, particularly in neighboring states like Ukraine, Georgia, and Belarus. Its operatives are believed to have directed cyber attacks, influenced elections, and coordinated disinformation campaigns aimed at destabilizing Western democracies. The infamous 2016 interference in the U.S. presidential election was widely attributed not only to the GRU, Russia's military intelligence, but also to FSB-linked cyber units that specialized in phishing, hacking, and propaganda distribution. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the FSB's activities lies in its alleged use of poison as a tool of both assassination and intimidation. In 2006, former FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko, living in exile in the UK, was murdered by radioactive polonium-210, a substance so rare and lethal that its use sent a clear message: this was not an accident, but a signature. A British inquiry later concluded that the killing was probably approved by Vladimir Putin. In 2020, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned with Novichok, a Soviet-era nerve agent. He survived, but only after emergency evacuation to Germany. Western intelligence agencies concluded that FSB operatives had tracked him for weeks and administered the poison, a claim bolstered by investigative journalists who later obtained phone records and confessions linking FSB agents directly to the attempt on Navalny's life. But beyond high-profile assassinations, the FSB's most insidious influence lies in its quiet omnipresence within Russian society. The agency has eyes everywhere, thanks to a vast network of informants, surveillance technologies, and legal mandates requiring companies, internet providers, and even religious institutions to comply with state monitoring. Opposition leaders have their phones tapped, journalists are harassed or imprisoned, and even ordinary citizens can be summoned for questioning based on social media posts or private conversations. The fear is not irrational. It is institutional. Yet, for all its opacity, the FSB is not unshakable. Its record includes failures, internal corruption scandals, and bureaucratic turf wars with other Russian agencies like the GRU and SVR. The agency has been accused of fabricating terror plots, coercing confessions, and bungling operations that led to civilian deaths, such as the controversial storming of the Moscow theater hostage crisis in 2002 and the Beslan school siege in 2004, both of which ended with hundreds of casualties. These incidents, while presented as victories in the domestic media, exposed deep flaws in operational planning and public safety protocols. Internationally, the FSB's reach has strained Russia's diplomatic relationships. Alleged interference in elections across Europe, aggressive cyber operations against NATO members, and covert activities in Syria and Africa have drawn condemnation and sanctions. Yet the Kremlin views these efforts as essential, part of a larger asymmetrical strategy to counterbalance what it sees as Western encroachment. For Putin and his inner circle, the FSB is not just a defensive tool, it is a means of asserting Russian power in a world that no longer respects the old Soviet gravity. Structurally, the FSB is headquartered in Lubyanka Square, Moscow, once the dreaded home of the KGB and a symbol of state terror. The building remains a powerful metaphor, both a relic of the past and a command center for the future. The FSB's director, currently appointed by the president, oversees thousands of operatives, analysts, cyber specialists, and field agents. Its budget, like much of its operation, is classified. Its accountability mechanisms are weak. Oversight is minimal. And its relationship with the judiciary is one of command, not submission. Critics have called the FSB the deep state of Russia, but that may underestimate its prominence. It is not beneath the surface, it is on the surface, embedded in the very skin of Russian governance. Its alumni populate the highest levels of government. Its methods shape media narratives. Its goals align perfectly with a Kremlin that thrives on stability through control, loyalty through fear, and power through opacity. To Western observers, the FSB often appears as a remnant of a bygone era, more Cold War than cyber war. But this is a dangerous misunderstanding. The FSB has evolved. It has digitized. It has adapted to a world of data flows, digital descent, and geopolitical complexity. And unlike many Western agencies constrained by politics and procedure, the FSB enjoys a flexibility born of authoritarianism. It moves quickly, answers quietly, and punishes decisively. Understanding the FSB is not merely an academic exercise, it is essential for understanding the nature of modern Russia. It is a nation where the lines between security and sovereignty have blurred, where power is projected through surveillance, and where trust is a liability. The FSB is not just watching Russia. It is shaping it, molding it, guarding it against change as fiercely as it once guarded it against revolution. As we move from Russia to China, we encounter an intelligence agency cloaked in even greater mystery, one that speaks softly, works silently, and has the full might of a rising superpower behind it. It is time to step behind the red curtain and examine the enigmatic Ministry of State Security, or MSS. MSS, the veiled eye of the dragon. Where the CIA leans on technological superiority and Mossad thrives on bold, kinetic precision, and the FSB draws its power from political dominance and a legacy of fear, China's Ministry of State Security, better known by its acronym, MSS, operates in a way that is far more elusive, and in many ways, more insidious. It does not announce itself with loud assassinations or media spectacles. It rarely appears in headlines, and even when it does, its presence is cloaked in ambiguity. Yet make no mistake, the MSS is one of the most formidable and far-reaching intelligence agencies in the world. Its operations are embedded not just in the realm of national security but in the very fiber of modern geopolitical strategy, economic competition, and ideological survival. In China, where the party is the state, and where thought is a domain of control, the MSS is not merely a security apparatus, it is a guardian of the Communist Party's version of reality. To understand the MSS, one must begin with a fundamental truth about the Chinese Communist Party: CCP information control is power. Unlike democratic nations where intelligence agencies exist to serve the state as a whole, answering to oversight, balanced by law, the MSS is designed to serve the party first, the people second. Its roots go back to the earliest days of the CCP's revolutionary struggle, when information gathering was a matter of literal survival. In the 1920s and 30s, communist cells infiltrated Kuomintang ranks, betrayed police movements, and organized underground resistance networks. Mao Zedong himself famously praised espionage as one of the cornerstones of revolution, stating that intelligence work was the ears and eyes of our struggle. The modern incarnation of the MSS was established in 1983, when China's internal and external intelligence functions were merged into a single entity, bringing together the remnants of the Ministry of Public Security's investigative arms and the international-facing aspects of military intelligence. This centralization was no accident. The leadership under Deng Xiaoping, intent on opening China to the world while preserving one-party rule, understood that a modernized intelligence service was necessary not only to prevent subversion but to navigate the complexities of diplomacy, trade, and global competition. The MSS would become China's eyes, ears, and, increasingly, its whispering voice abroad. Unlike the CIA, MI6, or even the FSB, the MSS operates with an almost monastic silence. There are no public directors giving speeches, no official building that welcomes scrutiny. Its headquarters in Beijing, located on Baishikio Road, appears nondescript to the unknowing eye, guarded not by architecture, but by layers of opacity. Even the identity of its leadership has often been unclear to the outside world, with names only emerging through leaks or rare disclosures. The deliberate invisibility is not just protective, it is ideological. The MSS does not engage in spy fiction or pop culture branding. It is not interested in drama. It is interested in results. One of the MSS's most defining characteristics is the scale and breadth of its ambition. While most intelligence agencies focus on national defense, the MSS sees security in far broader terms. It targets political dissent, religious movements, foreign influence, academic independence, economic theft, media narratives, and even cultural identity. Its mandate extends not just beyond borders but beyond what many would consider traditional intelligence work. For the MSS, surveillance and control are not tactical, they are philosophical. The party must remain unchallenged. Stability must be preserved. Anything that threatens ideological conformity, whether it is a professor in a Canadian university, a Uyghur journalist in exile, or a local dissident with a WeChat following, is considered a security risk. Much of the MSS's modern reputation rests on its success in economic and industrial espionage. Over the past 2 decades, the agency has been repeatedly linked to massive campaigns of intellectual property theft, cyber infiltration, and trade secret extraction targeting Western corporations, defense contractors, research institutions, and governments. One of the most infamous examples was the 2014 indictment by the U.S. Department of Justice of 5 Chinese military hackers, working closely with the MSS, who allegedly penetrated networks belonging to American steel, energy, and technology firms. Their goal, prosecutors argued, was not merely state security, it was to give Chinese companies a competitive edge by stealing designs, formulas, negotiations, and pricing strategies. It was espionage in the service of economics. Another major case emerged in 2018, when Yan Junsu, a high-ranking MSS officer, was lured to Belgium and arrested, marking one of the first times a known Chinese intelligence agent was extradited to the United States. Su was accused of targeting aerospace companies like GE Aviation, attempting to steal jet engine designs by recruiting insiders and planting malware. His capture stunned the intelligence community, not just for what it revealed about China's aggressive targeting of advanced technology, but for how deeply and systemically the MSS was involved in orchestrating it. Su's trial lifted the curtain on a vast apparatus of corporate and academic penetration. Cyber warfare is another domain where the MSS has demonstrated a global footprint. The agency is believed to operate, or coordinate, Advanced Persistent Threat (APT) groups like APT-10, Stone Panda, which have been linked to sophisticated intrusions into global cloud providers, healthcare systems, pharmaceutical research, and more. These cyber units do not work independently but are believed to be contracted through state-backed private firms, offering the MSS plausible deniability. This outsourcing model blurs the line between criminal hacking and state operations, allowing China to engage in large-scale intelligence operations with minimal diplomatic consequence. Yet the MSS is not just active in cyberspace or boardrooms. Its human intelligence, operations are equally far-reaching. The agency aggressively targets Chinese citizens abroad, particularly students, scientists, and members of the diaspora community. Through both surveillance and coercion, the MSS attempts to cultivate informants and silence dissent. Programs like Fox Hunt and Skynet have been publicly promoted by the Chinese government as anti-corruption campaigns, aimed at returning fugitives to justice. In reality, many of those pursued are political dissidents, activists, or individuals accused of crimes in secretive party investigations. Some are coerced into returning through threats to their families still living in China. Others are simply abducted. Domestically, the MSS plays a critical role in monitoring minority populations and suppressing separatist sentiments. In regions like Xinjiang and Tibet, the MSS works alongside the Public Security Bureau and the People's Armed Police to maintain surveillance grids, facial recognition systems, and digital monitoring programs that track every movement, message, and transaction. These technologies are not merely tools of observation, they are instruments of control, designed to anticipate dissent before it materializes. In Xinjiang, where over 1 million Uyghur Muslims have been detained in re-education camps, MSS personnel are believed to help manage the ideological programming of detainees, ensuring that religious identity is erased and party loyalty is installed. The MSS also operates an expansive network of front organizations, think tanks, and cultural exchange platforms designed to cultivate soft power and collect intelligence. Institutions like the China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations, CISR, serve dual roles, publicly academic, but quietly strategic. Chinese scholars and visiting fellows often operate under guidance from the MSS, gathering open-source information and profiling foreign experts, journalists, and diplomats. These efforts, while less overtly hostile than hacking or surveillance, serve the same purpose: information dominance. One of the MSS's greatest strengths is its integration with China's vast bureaucracy and surveillance state. Unlike the CIA or MI6, which are standalone agencies with legal boundaries, the MSS works in concert with other branches of government, including the police, judiciary, corporate regulators, and media oversight bodies. It taps into China's nationwide grid of artificial intelligence, CCTV, social credit systems, and digital monitoring, creating a holistic intelligence ecosystem. It doesn't merely collect data, it absorbs entire populations into its matrix of control. Ironically, the MSS's strength is also its weakness. The very secrecy that allows it to operate so effectively also makes it vulnerable to factionalism, political purges, and internal paranoia. In 2015, one of the agency's top figures, Vice Minister Ma Jian, was arrested for corruption and later sentenced to life imprisonment. His fall was part of a broader anti-corruption campaign led by Xi Jinping, but many believe it was also a political move, part of an effort to consolidate Xi's control over the intelligence apparatus. This revealed not only the MSS's immense power but the dangerous game its leaders play in China's opaque political theater. Under Xi, the MSS has become even more empowered, more insulated, and more mission-driven. It no longer merely protects the party from external threats, it defines those threats expansively, including any criticism of China's political system, economic model, or historical narrative. Its operations have extended into universities, publishing houses, film industries, and tech platforms. Its influence is not always about collecting secrets, it is also about shaping perceptions, guiding global discourse, and silencing alternate realities. The MSS, in many ways, represents the future of intelligence, hybrid, decentralized, digitally embedded, ideologically driven, and nearly invisible. It does not need to assassinate to be feared. It does not need to act illegally to be effective. Its tools are laws written vaguely, technologies deployed broadly, and loyalties cultivated quietly. To study the MSS is to see how power adapts in the 21st century, not with brute force, but with quiet omniscience. It is the state behind the screen, the whisper in the algorithm, the fingerprint on the firewall. And in a world increasingly shaped by information warfare and authoritarian resurgence, the MSS is not just a player, it is a master. As we turn now toward the West once more, we encounter a different model, France's DGSE, an agency operating with quiet elegance, global ambition, and an understated efficiency honed through decades of shadow diplomacy and counterterrorism. DGSE, the quiet artisan of French power. In the heart of Paris, behind anonymous facades and government ministries, sits one of the world's most discreet and capable intelligence agencies. France's Direction Générale de la Sécurité Extérieure, or DGSE, lacks the cinematic mythology of the CIA, the fearsome legacy of Russia's FSB, or the global mystique of Mossad. But that is precisely its strength. Operating in the shadows, fluent in silence, the DGSE is less a sledgehammer than a scalpel, precise, elegant, and deeply embedded in the logic of statecraft. In a world dominated by Anglo-American intelligence hegemony and rising Eastern surveillance regimes, France's DGSE carves out a distinct niche, that of the sovereign tactician, quiet yet deeply influential. The origins of the DGSE trace back to the post-World War II reordering of France's intelligence community. During the war, the Free French forces under Charles de Gaulle had established the Bureau Central de Renseignements et d'Action, BCRA, a resistance-focused intelligence unit that operated out of London. It was this organization, forged in exile and clandestine warfare, that would eventually evolve into the modern DGSE. After the war, France recognized the need for a centralized foreign intelligence service that could serve both in conventional espionage and covert operations. Through decades of mergers and restructurings, that vision became reality in 1982, when the DGSE was formally established as the country's primary external intelligence agency, answering directly to the Ministry of Armed Forces. But France, unlike many of its Western allies, has always maintained a deeply sovereign approach to intelligence. Where Britain and the United States have shared intelligence under the so-called Five Eyes alliance, France has often preferred a posture of controlled independence. This strategic autonomy reflects the broader philosophy of French foreign policy, to protect national interests on its own terms, to retain maneuverability, and to avoid entanglement in the geopolitical designs of larger powers. The DGSE, then, is not merely a tool of military necessity, it is an instrument of national identity. In terms of structure, the DGSE operates with distinct directorates responsible for intelligence gathering, technical operations, security and counterintelligence, and action, known as the Service Action, the branch tasked with covert missions abroad. Within this clandestine arm exists a network of elite operatives capable of conducting sabotage, exfiltration, paramilitary support, and targeted assassinations if necessary. The Service Action is often compared to Britain's SAS or America's CIA Special Activities Center, though far less is known about its specific missions. This is no accident. The DGSE's culture is built around discretion, and its operatives are rigorously trained not only in tradecraft, but in silence. The DGSE came into global view in the 1980s, most infamously during Operation Satanique, the code name for the controversial bombing of the Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior in 1985. Greenpeace had been campaigning against France's nuclear testing in the Pacific, and the French government, concerned about disruption to its strategic weapons program, authorized a covert sabotage mission in New Zealand. DGSE frogmen planted explosives on the hull of the vessel, which sank in Auckland Harbor, killing photographer Fernando Pereira. The operation, meant to be bloodless and deniable, instead became a diplomatic disaster. 2 DGSE agents were arrested, international outrage erupted, and France was forced to apologize and pay reparations. It was a rare public stain on an agency that prided itself on invisibility. Yet the Rainbow Warrior scandal did not define the DGSE. If anything, it became a turning point, a lesson in risk, exposure, and the cost of failure. In the years that followed, the agency refined its methods, modernized its capabilities, and expanded its global reach. Unlike some of its counterparts, which focus heavily on a few global rivals, the DGSE's worldview is multipolar and pragmatic. Its agents operate in Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, driven less by ideology than by realpolitik and national interest. Africa, in particular, remains a critical theater for the DGSE. France's historical and economic ties to the continent, especially in former colonial regions, have long justified a robust intelligence presence. French operatives monitor political instability, terrorist threats, and mineral resource competition across countries like Mali, Niger, the Central African Republic, and Chad. The DGSE works closely with French military forces deployed in the Sahel region under Operation Barkhane, coordinating intelligence on jihadist movements such as Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, ISGS. In these arenas, the DGSE often works in ways that blur the line between intelligence gathering and direct action, tracking, targeting, and even eliminating high-value individuals. In the Middle East, the DGSE has played a critical role in counterterrorism and intelligence operations related to Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and Iraq. Following the rise of ISIS, DGSE assets worked alongside other Western agencies to identify French nationals traveling to fight in the region, as well as to monitor the movement of arms and ideology across Europe's porous borders. The agency was instrumental in supporting French police and domestic intelligence in the aftermath of the 2015 Paris attacks, during which 130 people were killed in coordinated shootings and bombings. While the DGSI, Direction Générale de la Sécurité Intérieure, is responsible for domestic threats, the DGSE provided critical foreign intelligence on the transnational networks behind the attacks. The DGSE's technical capabilities have also evolved dramatically in the 21st century. Once reliant on traditional human networks, the agency has invested heavily in SIGINT, signals intelligence, cyber operations, and satellite surveillance. In 2008, France launched the French Elan system, a network of listening stations akin to America's Echelon program, capable of intercepting international communications. The DGSE also collaborates with France's Cyber Defense Agency, ANSSI, and with private tech contractors to identify digital threats, monitor foreign interference, and track cyber espionage activities. Reports in 2013 revealed that the DGSE maintained a sweeping metadata collection program, capturing telephone and email records, much like the NSA, though with little public oversight. The revelations sparked debate, but few reforms, highlighting the tension between national security and civil liberties in the digital age. Despite its growing technological arsenal, the DGSE remains firmly rooted in the art of human intelligence. The agency is known for cultivating long-term assets within foreign governments, corporations, and organizations, agents who provide not just raw data, but context, motivation, and strategic foresight. French intelligence officers are trained to think like diplomats, not just spies, to build rapport, understand culture, and operate with subtlety. Their fluency in language, politics, and behavior allows them to move where drones and intercepts cannot. This human-centric approach has enabled the DGSE to punch above its weight in international affairs, influencing negotiations, detecting early signs of crisis, and managing France's global posture without needing overwhelming scale. Unlike the more muscular and militarized approach of American intelligence, or the ideological rigidity of China and Russia's services, the DGSE operates with what might be called strategic elegance. It does not seek to dominate global intelligence circles, but to outmaneuver them where it matters. Its agents are trained to avoid spectacle. Their success lies in what never reaches the public. The DGSE's ethos is not disruption, it is balance, preservation, leverage. Intelligence, in the French model, is a game of patience and poise. Still, the DGSE is not without controversy. Human rights organizations have accused the agency of sharing intelligence with regimes that carry out torture. Its deep involvement in North and West African politics has raised questions about neo-colonial influence. And while France remains committed to democratic principles, its intelligence practices, like those of all great powers, often reflect realpolitik over idealism. In the world of espionage, morality bends to necessity, and necessity often speaks French in quiet rooms behind closed doors. Within the French public, the DGSE inspires a blend of admiration and indifference. It lacks the cultural mythology of Britain's MI6 or America's CIA, and most citizens could not name its current director. This obscurity suits the agency fine. For the DGSE, effectiveness lies not in visibility, but in enduring relevance. It is the whisper behind presidential decisions, the unseen hand in diplomatic negotiations, the quiet caller when something must be done, but never acknowledged. As the 21st century accelerates with AI, cyber warfare, climate conflict, and geopolitical multipolarity, the DGSE will remain one of France's most essential tools, not only for intelligence, but for strategy itself. Its greatest asset may not be its agents, its satellites, or its algorithms, but its ability to adapt, to remain unseen, unspoken, yet always there. Now, we shift from Europe to the vast subcontinent of India, where rising regional tension and nuclear stakes have given birth to one of the most secretive and formidable intelligence entities in Asia, the Research and Analysis Wing, better known as RA. RA, the shadow beneath the banyan tree. In the teeming chaos of South Asia, where history runs deep, borders bleed uncertainty, and geopolitics is often measured not in treaties but in whispers and scars, India's Research and Analysis Wing, or RA, stands as one of the most elusive and quietly potent intelligence agencies in the world. Largely unknown outside its region and seldom confirmed by its own government, RA exists in the twilight, operating where diplomacy falters and where threats must be preempted, not just repelled. For India, a nation born amid violent partition, encircled by rival powers, and home to vast internal complexity, the very idea of intelligence work is inseparable from existential necessity. Unlike the CIA, which rose during the Cold War to project American influence globally, or MI6, which evolved from empire, RA was born of a crisis that laid bare India's strategic vulnerability, the 1962 Sino-Indian War. India, then relying heavily on the Intelligence Bureau, IB, for both domestic and foreign surveillance, was caught off guard by Chinese aggression along the Himalayan border. The defeat was not merely military, it was informational. In the aftermath, it became clear that India needed an intelligence agency that could look outward, anticipate threats, and operate with the flexibility and boldness that conventional institutions could not provide. Thus, in 1968, under the leadership of then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, RA was created as an independent foreign intelligence service, separate from the IB, with a mandate focused on external intelligence, counterterrorism, covert operations, and strategic monitoring of India's adversaries, most notably Pakistan and China. Its first director, Rameshwarnath Kao, a brilliant and austere intelligence officer known for his discretion and loyalty, laid the foundations of the agency's culture, one that continues to value secrecy over spectacle, and results over recognition. From its earliest days, RA has operated under a veil of anonymity. Its officers are never named publicly, its operations are never officially acknowledged, and its budget, drawn from the Cabinet Secretariat, remains hidden from parliamentary scrutiny. This structural invisibility, while criticized by some, has also granted the agency remarkable freedom to act swiftly and quietly, often in complex and politically sensitive theaters. RA's work is not limited to espionage, it includes psychological operations, influence campaigns, and active support to pro-Indian elements in hostile regions. In a region where proxy warfare is the norm, RA has become a master of the indirect approach. Nowhere is this more evident than in Bangladesh, where RA played a critical role during the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War. As tensions rose between East and West Pakistan, RA trained and equipped Mukti Bahini guerrilla fighters, supported Bengali resistance, and coordinated intelligence operations that would ultimately pave the way for Indian military intervention. The result was not only the creation of a new nation but the decisive weakening of Pakistan, India's chief strategic rival. Though RA never claimed credit, its role in shaping the outcome of that war is now widely recognized by historians, and quietly remembered in Islamabad's corridors of power. In the decades that followed, RA turned its attention to a host of regional threats. In Kashmir, the agency has operated both overtly and covertly to counter cross-border infiltration and to dismantle networks of Pakistani-backed insurgents. While India's military and domestic intelligence handle the brunt of counterinsurgency, RA's assets across the line of control have provided early warnings, disrupted funding channels, and occasionally neutralized threats through indirect means. The agency's capacity for long-term infiltration, particularly in hostile territory, is considered one of its key strengths. RA has also been active in Sri Lanka, especially during the 1980s and 1990s, when the island nation was mired in civil war. In its early stages, India, through RA, provided training and arms to Tamil militant groups, including the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam, LTTE, as a way to assert regional influence and pressure the Sinhalese-dominated government. However, when the LTTE turned into a terrorist group with transnational ambitions, and after the assassination of former Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi in 1991 by an LTTE suicide bomber, RA's relationship with these groups shifted dramatically. The agency then began supporting counterinsurgency efforts and collecting intelligence on Tamil separatist networks abroad. This reversal underscores RA's adaptability and the moral complexity of operating in South Asia's ever-changing terrain. But RA's greatest fixation, both historically and today, is Pakistan, its nuclear-armed, ideologically rival neighbor. The two countries have fought multiple wars, and beneath the surface of official diplomacy lies a constant intelligence war of infiltrations, defections, false flag operations, and narrative battles. RA is believed to have supported Baloch separatists in western Pakistan, monitored terrorist training camps in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and disrupted planned attacks on Indian soil. The 2008 Mumbai attacks, carried out by Lashkar-e-Taiba operatives allegedly with ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, backing, were a watershed moment. Since then, RA has ramped up its counter-terrorism coordination with domestic agencies, sharpened its human operations abroad, and intensified efforts to expose Pakistan's proxy networks. In Afghanistan, too, RA has operated with quiet determination, building influence through infrastructure projects, education, and political connections, all while collecting intelligence on Pakistani movements and Islamist networks. Its role in the region, while not overtly militarized, has drawn the ire of Pakistan, which accuses RA of fomenting instability in its western provinces. These accusations, though difficult to prove, reflect the deep-rooted mistrust between the two nations and the enduring effectiveness of RA's presence in the shadows. But RA is not merely a regional player. In recent decades, as India has sought to position itself as a rising global power, the agency has expanded its reach to Europe, North America, Africa, and East Asia. Indian nationals living abroad, including students, scientists, and diaspora leaders, have occasionally found themselves under discreet observation. RA monitors not only anti-India activism but also potential infiltration by rival agencies, including Pakistan's ISI and China's MISIS. These global operations, often conducted through embassies, consulates, or front organizations, reflect RA's understanding that 21st-century intelligence is not defined by territory, but by influence. Cybersecurity has also become a frontier. Though RA is not primarily a signals intelligence agency, that role falls to India's NTRO, National Technical Research Organization. It works closely with NTRO and other defense units to track digital threats, foreign espionage, and online radicalization. India's rapid digitalization, especially in defense and space technology, has made cyber defense a high priority, and RA has increased its presence in cyber counterintelligence, particularly regarding Chinese and Pakistani intrusions. Yet RA is not without criticism. Its lack of external oversight has raised concerns about accountability. Allegations of political misuse, especially during India's emergency period in the 1970s, have stained its reputation. Additionally, its structure has often been described as too hierarchical and bureaucratic, limiting agility. Critics argue that RA has historically lacked the budget, training, and interagency coordination enjoyed by its Western counterparts. Reforms have been slow, and while there have been moves toward modernization, the agency remains largely closed to public scrutiny. Recruitment into RA remains mysterious. Unlike the CIA or MI6, which run visible recruitment campaigns, RA draws much of its talent from the Indian Police Service, Armed Forces, and Civil Service, particularly through the Research and Analysis Service, RAS. However, in recent years, lateral entry and specialized hiring, particularly in languages, tech, and strategic studies, have begun to reshape the agency's human capital. Training is rigorous, focused on fieldcraft, languages, cultural immersion, and political analysis. Officers are expected to operate independently, often in hostile environments, and with minimal logistical support, a legacy of India's traditionally cautious approach to external operations. Publicly, RA does not exist in India's political discourse. Its directors do not testify before Parliament, its operations are not disclosed, and its failures, when they occur, are buried beneath silence. This secrecy, while sometimes stifling to reform, has also been key to the agency's survival. In a democratic nation of over 1.4 billion people, rife with internal diversity and regional volatility, RA has preserved its integrity by remaining outside the spotlight. Yet its legacy is undeniable. In a region where every neighbor poses a unique challenge, and where internal and external threats bleed into each other, RA has become India's most important line of invisible defense. It is not celebrated in film, nor dramatized in novels. It is not glamorous. But it is effective. And as India steps more assertively onto the world stage, with ambitions stretching from Silicon Valley to the South China Sea, RA's role will only grow more central. To understand RA is to understand India's cautious but resolute vision of power, indirect, adaptive, rooted in history, but always looking outward. It is the whisper beneath the banyan tree. The silent hand in a crowded bazaar. The long memory of a civilization that, though slow to awaken, never forgets. Next, we move to the heart of Europe, to a post-war power reborn from division, now united and vigilant. There, in Germany, the BND operates with quiet efficiency, drawing on a Cold War legacy to defend a nation at the crossroads of East and West. BND, watching the past, guarding the present. In the heart of Europe, where wars once shattered borders and walls once split nations in two, a different kind of barrier now exists, less visible, but no less vital. It is the barrier of information, the unseen shield of insight and anticipation. And standing at its edge is Germany's Bundesnachrichtendienst, or BND, the Federal Intelligence Service. To outsiders, the BND is perhaps one of the least sensational intelligence agencies in the world, no flamboyant assassinations, no headlines of coups or chaos. But in this quiet professionalism lies its true power. The BND is not a tool of ideology or empire. It is the sober guardian of a country that remembers what happens when intelligence fails. Germany's approach to intelligence is shaped by its unique history. Few countries have wrestled more directly with the consequences of surveillance gone wrong. From the Gestapo of Nazi Germany to the Stasi of East Germany, a sprawling, paranoid network that turned neighbor against neighbor and recorded even the thoughts of its citizens, Germans have inherited a profound skepticism towards state secrecy. And so, when the BND was officially established in 1956, it was born into a paradox, a nation traumatized by its past yet in desperate need of protection in the emerging Cold War. It would have to protect without oppressing, watch without controlling, and serve without dominating. It was an intelligence agency created not to control the people, but to prevent the state from ever again descending into totalitarianism. But even this birth was not so clean. The BND was formed from the remnants of Organisation Gehlen, an intelligence network run by Reinhard Gehlen, a former Wehrmacht general who had headed Nazi Germany's military intelligence on the Eastern Front. After the war, Gehlen struck a deal with the Americans, offering his files on the Soviet Union and his network of anti-communist contacts in exchange for protection and funding. Thus began one of the most controversial legacies in intelligence history. The United States helped rebuild West Germany's intelligence apparatus using the brains and methods of former Nazis. For over a decade, Gehlen would lead the BND, bringing with him not only Cold War pragmatism but also the shadows of a darker past. Under Gehlen, the BND's primary mission was clear: collect intelligence on the Soviet Union, East Germany, and Warsaw Pact nations. The BND played a key role in NATO's early warning systems, offering insights into troop movements, political shifts, and Soviet espionage tactics. Though not as flamboyant as the CIA or KGB, the BND developed its own deep networks in Eastern Europe, operating with the caution and precision that would become its trademark. In the tense climate of the Cold War, West Germany was a frontline state, and the BND was its listening post. But these early years were far from flawless. The BND was plagued by Soviet infiltration, numerous operations were compromised by moles, and at least one high-ranking officer was exposed as a double agent. Additionally, the agency was criticized for its reluctance to confront its Nazi roots. While many nations made efforts, however flawed, to reckon with their past, the BND remained silent for decades. It wasn't until the 2000s that a formal inquiry was launched to examine the agency's origins, leading to the 2011 release of classified documents and a damning assessment. The BND had employed hundreds of former SS officers and Gestapo agents long into the post-war era. Despite its complicated past, the BND matured into a respected and effective agency. After German reunification in 1990, it inherited a new set of challenges. The collapse of East Germany and the Stasi left a massive intelligence vacuum in the East. The BND absorbed files, infrastructure, and, quietly, some personnel, but it also faced the enormous task of rebuilding trust. Germany's political culture, increasingly shaped by transparency and civil liberties, demanded tighter controls on intelligence activity. Oversight committees were empowered. Legal frameworks were rewritten. The BND, once operating in the shadows of its American and British counterparts, now had to navigate the delicate balance of intelligence in a democratic society. In the 21st century, the BND has pivoted toward new domains: counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and global surveillance. While it remains focused on traditional state threats, particularly from Russia and China, its priorities have expanded to include Islamist extremism, transnational organized crime, and industrial espionage. The 9/11 attacks profoundly impacted Germany, especially after it was revealed that members of the Hamburg terror cell had helped plan the operation. In response, the BND deepened cooperation with allied agencies, enhanced its human intelligence networks in the Middle East, and supported domestic counter-radicalization efforts. In recent years, cyber intelligence has become a key pillar of the BND's operations. With Germany's status as Europe's economic powerhouse and industrial innovator, it has become a prime target for cyber attacks, particularly from China-linked APT groups and Russian hacking collectives. The BND works closely with Germany's Federal Office for Information Security, BSI, and the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, BFV, to detect intrusions, safeguard critical infrastructure, and identify foreign influence campaigns. Its cyber unit monitors everything from energy grids and financial systems to social media misinformation. In a world where digital warfare grows more potent than tanks and missiles, the BND is one of Europe's most active and capable cyber watchdogs. Yet, even with its modern capabilities, the BND remains largely unknown to the German public. It does not court attention, does not release statements, and is rarely the subject of Hollywood fascination. Its headquarters, moved in 2017 to a massive modernist complex in Berlin, stands as a paradox, the largest intelligence building in the Western world, housing thousands of employees, but wrapped in silence. Inside, analysts pore over satellite images, linguists intercept foreign chatter, and field agents send encrypted reports from dozens of nations, but outside, life goes on in Berlin without a whisper. This invisibility has both benefits and costs. In 2013, documents leaked by Edward Snowden revealed that the BND had cooperated with the U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, in data collection programs, some of which involved surveillance of German citizens and European leaders. The backlash was swift. Germans, already wary of state surveillance due to their history, demanded answers. Parliamentary inquiries were launched. Laws were tightened. The BND found itself walking a knife's edge, between fulfilling its international obligations as part of the global intelligence network and respecting the constitutional rights of its own citizens. The BND's recruitment and culture are also a study in contrast. It is not fueled by patriotism in the American sense, nor by class traditions like MI6. Its personnel are scientists, linguists, engineers, and analysts, drawn from universities, industry, and the military. Many are driven not by ideology, but by the quiet belief that knowledge is a kind of defense. The agency emphasizes analytical rigor, legal compliance, and discretion. Recruits are expected to think critically, speak multiple languages, and operate in morally complex environments with restraint and clarity. Despite its restraint, the BND has had its moments of daring. In 2006, it reportedly uncovered a major plot to bomb a German train, providing critical information that led to arrests and the prevention of mass casualties. It has been instrumental in monitoring Russian operations in Eastern Europe, and in identifying Chinese attempts to infiltrate German industry. Its successes, though rarely publicized, have earned the BND respect among its peers and policymakers. But the future will test the BND as never before. Germany now finds itself in a world of shifting alliances, resurgent autocracies, and domestic political fragmentation. The rise of far-right populism, economic uncertainty, and the digital manipulation of public opinion present new threats that blur the line between foreign and domestic intelligence. While the BND's mandate is strictly external, the reality is more complex. Foreign adversaries increasingly exploit internal vulnerabilities. In this gray zone, the BND must adapt without overstepping. To understand the BND is to understand Germany's posture in the 21st century, cautious, deliberate, rooted in history, yet aware that its role on the world stage demands vigilance. It is an agency born of contradiction, founded by men from a discredited past, reshaped by democracy, and now entrusted with defending a nation that still carries the memory of what happens when secrets become weapons against the people. The BND does not seek to dominate the world or silence its enemies. It seeks to listen, quietly, carefully, and constantly. In a world of noise, it is the agency that watches, not for power, but for warning signs. And in that watchfulness, it plays a role no less vital than its louder, more famous counterparts. Now, we turn our eyes to a far more controversial force, where loyalty is absolute and ambiguity is policy. In the shadowed terrain of South Asia, Pakistan's ISI wields influence like few others, both feared and admired, both state and state within a state. ISI, the state within the state. In the restless corridors of South Asia, where ideology, geography, and history converge in an intricate web of war and diplomacy, few institutions hold sway as profoundly as Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI. To some, it is the bulwark of national defense, the steel spine of a country surrounded by uncertainty. To others, it is a puppeteer in regional conflict, a master of shadow games whose fingerprints can be found in wars, assassinations, and revolutions. But to all, whether adversary, ally, or citizen, the ISI is an enigma. It is the power behind the power, the invisible state that whispers just behind the throne. The story of the ISI begins in the chaotic aftermath of empire. When Pakistan was carved out of British India in 1947, the new state was a hurried creation, birthed in blood and displacement. It inherited little of the colonial intelligence structure and immediately found itself at odds with India over Kashmir, a dispute that would become the defining obsession of its foreign policy. After a faltering performance during the First Kashmir War, Pakistani military leaders realized that battlefield outcomes depended not only on tanks and soldiers but on intelligence. Thus, in 1948, the ISI was founded, originally as a relatively small military intelligence body, designed to coordinate information between Pakistan's Army, Navy, and Air Force. But the ISI would not remain small for long. Its early years were shaped by Pakistan's perception of existential threats, from India, yes, but also from internal political instability and external ideological infiltration, especially during the Cold War. With a growing military establishment and fragile civilian institutions, the ISI began to grow in both size and mandate. Under the directorship of General Robert Cotham, a British officer who stayed on after partition to advise the military, the agency was reorganized along the lines of Western models, combining internal security, counterintelligence, foreign operations, and psychological warfare into a centralized apparatus. Yet it was during the Zia-ul-Haq era, 1977 to 1988, that the ISI truly became a force unto itself. With the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, the ISI found itself at the nexus of one of the largest covert wars in history. Billions of dollars from the CIA and Saudi intelligence flowed through Pakistan to support the Mujahideen fighting Soviet forces across the Afghan border. The ISI, acting as the chief conduit, managed training camps, distributed weapons, and built deep networks among the Afghan factions. This vast operation not only helped bleed the Soviets into withdrawal, it also transformed the ISI into an immensely powerful organization, flush with resources, deeply connected to Islamist groups, and accustomed to operating in total secrecy. But with power came mission drift. After the Soviet withdrawal and the subsequent Afghan civil war, the ISI maintained close ties with militant groups like the Taliban, which it viewed as a strategic asset in securing a pro-Pakistan government in Kabul. It also intensified support for militant outfits operating in Indian-administered Kashmir, such as Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, which were used to wage asymmetric warfare under the umbrella of plausible deniability. For the ISI, these groups were force multipliers, tools to bleed India and shape Afghanistan without direct confrontation. For the world, however, they became harbingers of terror. The Kargil War of 1999, in which Pakistani soldiers and militants infiltrated Indian positions in Kashmir, bore the hallmarks of ISI planning, calculated risk, deniable involvement, and a strategic aim to internationalize the Kashmir dispute. The gamble failed when India pushed back and the US pressured Pakistan to withdraw. But the operation revealed the ISI's capacity to orchestrate military adventurism without civilian oversight, a pattern that would repeat in different forms across the region. Nowhere did this pattern reach more devastating consequences than in Mumbai, in November 2008. 10 militants from Lashkar-e-Taiba carried out a coordinated attack across India's financial capital, killing over 170 people and paralyzing the city for 3 days. Interrogations of the lone surviving gunman and subsequent intelligence leaks pointed to ISI involvement, whether through direct planning, provision of training, or willful blindness. Though Pakistan denied complicity, the attack drew international condemnation and severely strained relations between the nuclear-armed neighbors. But the ISI's reputation was not just forged in violence, it was tempered in ambiguity. The 2011 U.S. raid in Abbottabad, which killed Osama bin Laden, raised searing questions. How had the world's most wanted man lived for years in a garrison town, less than a mile from Pakistan's premier military academy, without the ISI's knowledge? Theories ranged from incompetence to collusion. Though Pakistani authorities denied foreknowledge, the incident damaged the ISI's credibility on the world stage and strained its already complicated relationship with the CIA. It also highlighted a deeper truth, that the ISI operates within a complex matrix of national interests, strategic deniability, and shifting allegiances. Internally, the ISI plays a powerful, some would say dominant, role in Pakistan's politics. It has long been accused of manipulating elections, propping up favorable parties, intimidating journalists, and suppressing dissent. Civilian leaders who challenge the military's supremacy often find themselves undermined by ISI leaks or subject to thinly veiled threats. Critics have labeled the agency as a state within a state, immune from accountability, and answerable only to the powerful military establishment, which dominates Pakistan's security and foreign policy apparatus. Yet this shadow power is not without method. The ISI views itself as the defender of Pakistan's ideological and territorial integrity. In a country riddled with ethnic tensions, sectarian violence, and insurgencies, the agency sees its role as stabilizing, even if its methods are opaque. In Balochistan, it has been accused of enforced disappearances and suppression of nationalist movements. In Karachi, it has battled both Islamist militants and political militias. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, it has conducted complex operations against domestic terrorism, sometimes with, sometimes without, the knowledge of civilian authorities. Structurally, the ISI is headed by a three-star general, usually drawn from the army's ranks, and reports directly to the Chief of Army Staff, not the Prime Minister. This chain of command reinforces its military alignment and shields it from civilian oversight. The agency is divided into several divisions: internal, external, counterintelligence, and special operations, among others. It maintains deep liaison ties with foreign intelligence services, including those of China, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the Gulf states, though its relationship with Western agencies remains strained and transactional. In recent years, the ISI has adapted to the digital age. It monitors cyber threats, foreign-funded NGOs, and social media influencers. It runs surveillance programs aimed at preventing online radicalization, but also at controlling dissent. Journalists critical of the military often find themselves harassed, hacked, or warned. In the name of national security, freedom of expression is a luxury often curtailed. Despite its controversies, the ISI is not a rogue organization. It operates within the logic of Pakistan's strategic culture, one forged by war, insecurity, and regional rivalry. To Pakistan's military leaders, the agency is indispensable, the last line of defense in a hostile neighborhood, the only institution capable of seeing the chessboard 3 moves ahead. Its officers, often ideologically motivated, view themselves as patriots, guardians of a fragile state constantly under siege. Yet therein lies the paradox. In seeking to protect the state, the ISI has often undermined the very institutions that give states resilience: free media, independent judiciary, civilian supremacy. Its pursuit of strategic depth in Afghanistan has helped prolong instability. Its support for proxies has invited global scrutiny and terror blowback. Its lack of transparency has left many Pakistanis wondering who really governs their country. Still, to underestimate the ISI would be a mistake. Its networks run deep, its capabilities are sharp, and its strategic patience is unrivaled. It can lie low for years, nurturing assets and shifting alliances. It knows the terrain, literal and political, better than any foreign agency ever could. It operates not from the halls of Congress or Parliament, but from safe houses, border posts, madrasas, consulates, and cantonments. It understands that in South Asia, survival is not about idealism, it is about endurance. To study the ISI is to look into the heart of Pakistan's contradictions: democratic, yet dominated by its army, threatened, yet assertive, fractured, yet fiercely nationalistic. The ISI reflects all these facets, not as a malfunction, but as a mirror. As we leave the charged atmosphere of South Asia behind, we turn to a quieter theater, an agency few outside its hemisphere even think of, yet one that has earned quiet respect across the intelligence world. In the vast Pacific, the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, ASIS, operates with a subtlety and reach that belies its modest size. ASIS, the whispering sentinel of the Southern Hemisphere. Far from the battlefields of the Cold War and the crowded power corridors of Washington, Moscow, or Beijing, on a continent more associated with natural beauty than covert operations, lies a quiet but quietly formidable intelligence agency, one that rarely makes headlines, seldom appears in spy fiction, and yet holds a strategic vantage point over one of the world's most contested and volatile regions. This is ASIS, the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, a name that almost disappears into the shadows even as it watches them. To the average Australian, ASIS is largely unknown. Even within Canberra, its presence is discreet, its personnel invisible, its director a figure whose name is rarely spoken aloud. There are no overt recruitment campaigns. Its operations rarely leak. It does not boast or intimidate. But behind this cultivated silence lies an intelligence service that has, for decades, been at the forefront of regional espionage, counterterrorism, and diplomatic influence. And as Australia's place in the Indo-Pacific becomes more precarious, ASIS's role is more vital than ever. The agency was officially formed in 1952, at the height of the Cold War. Its establishment was not widely announced, nor even admitted publicly for 2 decades. Modeled loosely on Britain's MI6, ASIS was intended to serve as the country's external intelligence gathering body, complementing the domestic work of ASIO, Australian Security Intelligence Organisation. From its inception, ASIS was placed under the jurisdiction of the Department of Foreign Affairs, emphasizing not militarization, but statecraft, an agency that would use information, persuasion, and subterfuge to protect Australia's national interests abroad. But unlike its louder counterparts in the US or Russia, ASIS was not built to wage global spy wars. Its focus was regional, anchored in Southeast Asia, the South Pacific, and increasingly, the Indo-Pacific. Its strength lay not in numbers or firepower, but in cultural fluency, diplomatic agility, and the cultivation of long-term assets. ASIS officers are often described as methodical, quiet, and effective, able to blend in, form relationships, and extract information without ever raising suspicion. Yet ASIS's discretion has not always insulated it from controversy. In 1973, its existence became public after a former intelligence officer, Faye Wheeler, blew the whistle on its covert activities in Chile. Australia, it was revealed, had supported U.S. intelligence efforts during the Chilean coup against President Salvador Allende, supplying logistical help and monitoring political developments on the ground. The revelation led to a political firestorm and prompted then Prime Minister Gough Whitlam to briefly shut down some of ASIS's overseas operations. The agency, it seemed, had been moving in lockstep with American interests, without the explicit knowledge or approval of Australia's elected government. This tension between sovereignty and alliance has haunted ASIS ever since. As a member of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, alongside the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and New Zealand, Australia has access to some of the most comprehensive intelligence sharing arrangements in the world. But with this privilege comes risk, the potential for ASIS to be drawn into foreign-led operations that may not align with Australian public sentiment or policy. Over the years, successive governments have worked to better define ASIS's legal mandate, clarify oversight, and ensure that national interest, not alliance loyalty, is the agency's guiding star. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, ASIS found itself increasingly focused on terrorism. Following the 2002 Bali bombings, which killed 88 Australians and over 200 people in total, the agency intensified its human operations in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Working closely with local counterparts, often in politically sensitive environments, ASIS officers helped identify extremist networks, foil plots, and dismantle cells linked to Jamaat Islamiyah and Al-Qaeda. These operations were rarely acknowledged, but they significantly bolstered Australia's security in a time of global uncertainty. Yet terrorism was only part of the picture. ASIS has also long monitored the geopolitical tensions across the South China Sea, the strategic rise of China, and the delicate dynamics between Taiwan, Japan, and the United States. As Beijing's influence has grown, economically, militarily, and digitally, Australia has had to navigate a precarious balance between trade dependence and strategic caution. ASIS has played a key role in this balancing act, quietly collecting intelligence on Chinese foreign interference campaigns, cyber intrusions, and influence operations in the Pacific Islands and even within Australia's own political system. One of the most remarkable features of ASIS is its focus on the long game. Rather than conducting rapid-fire covert operations or headline-grabbing cyber offensives, the agency invests in relationships. It identifies trends early, positions assets in advance, and often acts in concert with Australia's diplomatic corps. Intelligence is not just about preempting threats, it is about shaping the conditions under which threats do not arise. This strategy was evident in ASIS's role during peacekeeping and reconstruction efforts in East Timor, where the agency provided critical intelligence during the country's fragile transition to independence in the early 2000s. However, East Timor would also become the site of one of ASIS's most controversial modern scandals. In 2004, it was revealed that ASIS operatives had planted listening devices in the East Timor cabinet room under the guise of an aid and development program. The goal was to eavesdrop on negotiations regarding oil and gas rights in the Timor Sea, a lucrative resource dispute between Australia and its newly independent neighbor. When the operation was exposed years later by Witness K, a former ASIS officer, and Bernard Callery, a lawyer assisting East Timor in its legal challenge, the Australian government responded not with accountability, but with prosecution. The Witness K affair sparked outrage and raised difficult questions about the boundaries of intelligence, ethics, and whistleblower protections in a democratic society. Legally, ASIS operates under the Intelligence Services Act 2001, which defines its role, limitations, and oversight mechanisms. The agency reports to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and is subject to review by the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, IGIS, and parliamentary committees. Yet much of ASIS's work remains classified, and public understanding of its scope and authority is minimal. This opacity, while arguably necessary, creates a tension between democratic accountability and operational secrecy. Today, ASIS is more relevant than ever. With Australia's strategic environment growing more complex, amid rising authoritarianism, great power rivalry, cyber warfare, and transnational crime, the need for agile, informed, and covert action is clear. ASIS is expanding its footprint in the Indo-Pacific, deepening relationships with regional allies, and investing heavily in cyber intelligence, language training, and diverse recruitment. It is also playing a key role in supporting Australia's response to climate change-driven instability, particularly in fragile island nations vulnerable to both environmental collapse and geopolitical exploitation. The agency remains small by global standards. Estimates suggest it employs fewer than 1,000 personnel, but its influence far exceeds its size. In an age where information is weaponized, influence is subtle, and military escalation is no longer the first move, ASIS's quiet capabilities are central to national strategy. To understand ASIS is to understand Australia's vision of power, not brash, not imperial, but careful, calculated, and loyal to the long view. It is an agency that guards not just borders, but relationships. It does not act for glory, but for position. It knows that in the modern world, the most effective influence is often the one no one sees. From the windswept shores of Sydney to the crowded alleyways of Jakarta, from diplomatic corridors in Washington to sensitive briefings in Suva, ASIS remains a steady hand in a region of shifting sands. It whispers where others shout. It watches where others wander. It moves when others pause. And as we conclude our journey through the world's most mysterious and powerful intelligence services, we are left with a striking insight. Though their names, methods, and cultures may differ, these agencies all operate from the same essential truth, that information is power, and that in the modern age, the battle for it is constant, silent, and eternal. Intelligence and ethics, shadows with boundaries. For all their strategic brilliance, global reach, and vital national functions, the world's most powerful intelligence agencies share one defining contradiction: they are entrusted to protect the values of civilization by operating outside many of its rules. In theory, they serve democracy, sovereignty, and peace. In practice, they often trespass on foreign soil, deceive allies and enemies alike, manipulate narratives, and act with lethal force, sometimes without trial, sometimes without acknowledgement. And in this paradox lies the uncomfortable truth of modern intelligence: power and principle do not always align. Espionage has never been a profession for the pure of heart. It is, by nature, a betrayal of trust, of borders, of norms. It requires the seduction of secrets, the cultivation of lies, and often, the sacrifice of innocence in service to a greater strategic aim. But when that greater aim is national security, when the threat is real and time is short, few governments hesitate to look the other way. The ends, more often than not, justify the means. Yet whose ends? And what means? These questions have plagued intelligence agencies since their inception. During the Cold War, agencies like the CIA and KGB justified interventions, assassinations, and coups in the name of ideological containment. In the Middle East, Mossad and the ISI have engaged in proxy operations that reshaped entire regions. In modern China, the MSS fuses surveillance with ideology, shaping not just behavior but belief. Intelligence agencies do not merely respond to the world, they reshape it, often without democratic input or ethical clarity. Assassination, for instance, remains one of the most debated tools in the intelligence arsenal. The Israeli Mossad's Operation Wrath of God, which pursued the assassins of the 1972 Munich Olympics, was hailed by some as righteous justice, by others as extrajudicial vengeance. The U.S. drone strike that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in 2020 sparked a global debate over targeted killing and sovereignty. And the Russian FSB's suspected use of poisons on dissidents abroad, including polonium-210 and Novichok, crossed not just ethical lines, but chemical weapons conventions. In each case, intelligence justified the act. Morality was retrofitted after the fact, or discarded entirely. Torture, once a forbidden subject in liberal democracies, re-emerged in the post-9/11 world. Under the euphemism of enhanced interrogation, the CIA conducted waterboarding, stress positioning, and sensory deprivation at black sites across the globe, often with the knowledge, or complicity, of allied nations. Years later, Senate investigations revealed not only the brutality but also the questionable efficacy of these programs. The moral cost was high. The strategic gain, ambiguous at best. Even more pervasive, and less visible, is the mass surveillance now employed by many intelligence services. Agencies such as the NSA, GCHQ, and DGSE have built systems capable of collecting metadata on billions of communications, with limited oversight and murky boundaries. In authoritarian regimes like China and Russia, digital surveillance is fused with repression, tracking dissidents, suppressing protests, and manipulating online discourse. But even in democracies, the temptation to monitor the many for the sins of the few has proven hard to resist. Intelligence now operates not just on battlefields, but inside smartphones, social media, and encrypted networks. Privacy, once a cornerstone of liberty, has become a casualty of the age of infinite data. Yet legality and morality do not always walk hand in hand. Many intelligence operations are technically illegal under international law. Espionage itself is forbidden by most legal systems, yet universally practiced. Cyber intrusions, political interference, and covert funding of rebel groups or regime change efforts all blur the line between strategy and sabotage. Even humanitarian concerns, such as anti-terror operations or anti-narcotics missions, have at times served as cover for operations that support authoritarian allies or undermine democratic movements. Ethics, in intelligence, is rarely black and white. More often, it is painted in shades of plausible deniability. Compounding the challenge is the lack of transparency and accountability that defines most intelligence agencies. In democracies, oversight is often limited to select parliamentary or congressional committees, bound by secrecy and political calculation. Whistleblowers like Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, or Witness K have revealed internal abuses, but often at great personal cost. Governments tend to react not by confronting wrongdoing, but by silencing the messenger. National security becomes a shield, not just for defense, but for impunity. Some agencies have tried to address this gap. Legal reforms, inspector generals, and public ethics reviews have been introduced in countries like Germany, Australia, and the UK. But these remain exceptions. In most of the world, intelligence services remain outside the normal channels of justice. Their actions are known only to a few. Their mistakes, buried. Their victories, never confirmed. And yet, they wield immense influence over the trajectory of nations. So where should the line be drawn? Should intelligence agencies be allowed to act outside international law on matters of national security? Should assassinations, torture, and disinformation ever be tools of statecraft? Can privacy be sacrificed for protection? Can democracy survive institutions that operate in secret? There are no easy answers. Intelligence, by its very nature, deals in uncertainties, hypotheticals, and worst-case scenarios. It is judged not by what happened, but by what didn't, by attacks prevented, wars averted, threats contained. In this context, ethical clarity is a luxury rarely afforded. Decisions are made in minutes, based on incomplete information, and executed in faraway places by operatives whose names we will never know. And yet, the consequences are real. For every life saved, another may be lost. For every threat neutralized, a principle may be violated. Intelligence is not a villain, but it is not a hero either. It is a tool. And like all tools, its value depends on the hand that wields it, and the conscience behind that hand. In the end, perhaps the greatest ethical challenge is not how intelligence agencies operate, but how we choose to govern them. Their power is immense. Their work, necessary. But they must not become laws unto themselves. Secrecy must serve democracy, not subvert it. And in a world where the lines between war and peace, foreign and domestic, real and virtual continue to blur, the time has come for a deeper public reckoning with the shadows that move beneath our freedoms. Conclusion: the silent pulse of global power. Across the vast expanse of the modern world, through war zones and boardrooms, deserts and data centers, cold mountains and heated negotiations, there exists a constant, unseen rhythm. It is not the march of armies or the rise and fall of markets. It is something quieter, deeper. It is the silent pulse of intelligence, steady, relentless, and almost always invisible. In exploring the stories of 10 of the world's most famous and mysterious intelligence agencies, we have journeyed not only through history and geopolitics, but through the hidden architecture of power itself. From Langley to Lubyanka, Tel Aviv to Beijing, New Delhi to Berlin, and Islamabad to Canberra, we've examined the logic and legacy of institutions that do not merely observe the world, they shape it. They are not passive recorders of threat, but active participants in the outcomes of nations. Each agency carries its own personality. The CIA, ambitious and global, projects American will across continents. MI6, steeped in empire and secrecy, wears its legacy like a finely tailored suit. Mossad moves with sharp precision, born of necessity and honed by existential threat. The FSB looms like a specter over Russia's domestic and foreign life, at once modern and medieval. China's MSS blends ancient stratagems with digital omnipresence, serving not just the state, but the party's vision of total harmony. France's DGSE operates with quiet artistry, a hand extended in diplomacy while another slips beneath the table. Raw, patient and regional, carries the weight of a subcontinent on its back. Germany's BND, cautious but deeply capable, walks the line between vigilance and the scars of history. The ISI, both architect and arsonist, plays its complex game in the crucible of South Asia. And ASIS, the silent sentinel of the Southern Hemisphere, listens more than it speaks, and always acts with intent. Taken together, these agencies form a web, an informal order of watchers and whisperers, collaborators and competitors. They speak in ciphers, calculate in probabilities, and act in silences. They are rarely thanked, frequently blamed, and almost never seen. Their failures are often catastrophic, their successes, unsung. But intelligence is not just the domain of states. In the 21st century, information is democratized and weaponized. Corporations now rival governments in their capacity to surveil, predict, and influence. Private security firms conduct covert operations once reserved for sovereign powers. Hackers and whistleblowers alter the course of elections. And in this shifting terrain, the line between espionage and influence, security and suppression, grows ever thinner. That is why understanding the nature of intelligence is no longer a luxury for historians or spies, it is a necessity for citizens. Because in a world governed not just by laws but by secrets, we all live downstream of what intelligence agencies decide to do, or not do. They exist to protect us. That is the premise. But who protects us from them? And who protects them from themselves? The answers are not simple. They lie in oversight that is both informed and fearless. In laws that are flexible yet firm. In cultures that value secrecy, but not silence. And in the uncomfortable but essential truth that power, to be just, must always be watched, even when it watches us back.